Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Princeton Review's webinar, Countdown to Grad School Admission. My name is Valerie, and I'm part of the Princeton Review's national marketing team. I'll be co-hosting our presentation tonight along with Akil Bello. Before we kick off our webinar, let's cover a couple of housekeeping items. Just so you all know, everyone's lines are muted. So if you have a question or if there's something you'd like us to share, or if you'd like to share something with us, please use the question box located in your GoToWebinar menu bar. Also, we'll do our very best to get through everyone's questions tonight, but if we're unable to answer yours, just know that one of our admission experts will follow up with you after the webinar. Additionally, tonight's session is being recorded, so there's no need to take notes. Each one of you will be receiving a copy of the webinar recording within 48 hours. So sit back, enjoy, and learn some admission timeline strategies. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to Akil, and he'll give you guys a little bit of background on his experience. Take it away, Akil.
Thanks, Valerie. Good evening, everybody, and hopefully tonight we'll be able to walk through some of the basics of admissions to graduate school, answer a few of your questions about that, about the GRE, and any of those sort of things. If you have questions, feel free to use the question box at any time, and we'll get to that. I'm currently the Director of Equity and Access at the Princeton Review. As you can see from the slide here, I've done a little bit in test prep over the last 25, 27 years or so. So hopefully if you have questions about any of these tests, I'll be able to answer them and give you some sense of, what you're looking at in terms of the application cycle. All right, well, let's get to the good stuff. So here's the agenda for tonight, and we're going to stick to it fairly closely, except if questions take me in a different direction, happy to answer them as we go through. So we'll touch on admissions, we'll touch on the GRE, and then of course we'll talk about the Princeton Review and how we can help you guys. There's obviously a discount code on the screen for you, so that you might want to keep track of that or come back to it when you get the recording, so that if you sign up for anything with Princeton Review, you can use that code to get a nice little discount. All right, so grad school, right? Let's talk about what are we thinking about in terms of grad school and what that whole process should look like, right? Initially, right now, hopefully you guys have started some of your research by narrowing down your programs that you're interested in. I mean, the concept of grad school in and of itself is fairly vague because it runs the gamut from, an English program to a Master's of Engineering to a Master's of Creative Arts. So, what grad school means, for our purposes tonight is pretty much going to be everything that is not business school, MBA programs, not law school, and not medical school. Right? So we'll try to encompass all the others. The reason I'm pulling those apart is because they each have slightly different processes that we're not going to sort of encompass in these other programs. The business school MBA program is actually the most similar to what we're talking about, but for the most part, when you're discussing, graduate level degrees, law, business, and medical stand on their own. They've traditionally also had their own test separate from the GRE, which is the test we'll focus on tonight, which is usually the test required for all other programs, okay? So overall, we're talking about 500,000 people every year apply graduate school, right? So it's a fairly competitive pool when you're looking at the number of applicants across schools, across programs. So when you're thinking about applying to graduate school, what you have to think about is, how do I distinguish myself from all of these other applicants, right? How do I make sure that my one application out of the 500,000 applications in the country, or potentially the 2,000 applications at the program I'm interested in, which is sort of more important to you, how do I make sure that my application rises to the top of that pool of 2,000 or 1,000 people at the program you're applying to? So it's going to start with a lot of research, right? What are the factors that the program is interested in? What are they going to look at, right? The primary factors that they consider are what you're seeing here on the screen, right? Obviously your GPA from undergrad, right? Test scores at a lot of programs, and test scores, GRE scores, vary in weight depending on the program that you're interested in. Some programs will actually look at, a quant score more heavily than a verbal score. Some programs, like obviously, an English master's is less concerned with your quant GRE score than they are with your verbal GRE score, right? So as you start to determine what type of school, what type of program you're applying to, you also want to start to think about or ask questions, go to fairs to learn about how they weigh GRE scores in this process. Some programs just want you to take the test, and the weight of it isn't huge. But the more competitive the program, pretty much anything at Harvard is going to weigh the GRE scores pretty heavily, right? Because Harvard's competitive regardless of the program that you're looking at, right? I'm pretty sure the master's in theater arts at Harvard has a GRE score average which is in the 160s, right? It's theater arts, and probably GRE doesn't mean very much, but it's Harvard, and therefore it's highly competitive, and therefore the score averages are going to be high. So you want to start to investigate the programs you're interested in and what the scores mean. It's not as cut and dry as it was for college admissions, right? The use of GRE scores, the weight of GRE scores vary significantly in one university across the programs in that university. So applying to the math program is going to be different than applying to the public policy program, right? So make sure you do your research and try to figure out, you know, what those scores will mean for you at a particular institution. So looking at things such as, you know, so GRE scores, undergraduate GPA, you know, work experience. Work experience will also be one of those factors that varies quite a bit depending on the type of program. Some programs, applicants have almost no work experience. You know, Masters of English, many of those applicants will apply straight out of undergrad into a Masters of English program. So the work experience will be fairly minimal. Right? Let's take an MBA, for instance, which tends to have the highest amount of work experience. Right? If you're looking at an MBA program, many of which do accept the GRE, you might have a school that has 6 years work experience average for those types of programs. So make sure you investigate the weight work experience will carry within the program that you're interested in. So we have a couple of questions here that I think I just want to jump on. One is so letters of recommendations. Letters of recommendations is you know, you're going to have to get them. Usually the school will tell you who they are from, right? The program will tell you who they are from. Often they should be academic letters of recommendation, and it should be someone who is going to be able to speak well to your ability to succeed in an academic environment. So you don't want, you know, your mom's not going to write your letter of recommendation, right? It can't be your boyfriend, your cousin Joe. You want, you know, someone at work. You want potentially a professor. So if you're still in your senior year now or your junior year, now's the time to start cultivating relationships with those professors, right? Ideally, you want to identify the professor now who in 6 months you can ask for a letter of recommendation because you were such a stellar student, right? You don't really want to wait 3 years to ask a professor to try to remember you from 3 years ago to write your letter of recommendation. So the earlier you start thinking about all of these elements of the process, the easier it's going to become for you to manage this process well, okay? So start doing your research. And I'm getting a couple of questions about specific programs. And I will say I can't actually answer most of the questions that are very narrow to a program. Someone asked about a Master's of Science in Computer Science in California. That's really, really narrow. So I can't actually tell you how that's going to play at a particular program. Your best bet is to call the school. Admissions officers are actually really cool, right? If you get them at a fair, they will tell you the real deal. If you get them at, you know, you call the office, there's somebody there who's going to pick up to be able to answer a lot of these questions for you. So I would say with regard to specific programs and specific questions about programs, start by doing your research online, right? See what you can find out online about that computer science program, what the internet is saying, right? And then we know we're going to take that with a grain of salt. And then I'm going to formulate 3 or 4 questions that I can't answer online and give the admissions office a call. You know, to what extent does this computer science program weigh GRE quant versus GRE verbal. How much do I need to worry about my verbal? What is the average verbal score? Because usually you're not going to find a breakdown of quant versus verbal published online for specific programs. You'll probably find a total score. It varies a little bit, but that's what tends to happen. So start, thinking about the questions you need the answer to, formulate those questions, and then approach admissions officers at the fair, especially if you know the specific schools you're interested in. It's really easy to approach them and ask questions for if you go to an environment where they're ready to answer those kinds of questions. Places you can start for your research. Princeton Review, obviously, will have a lot of information on schools and programs and the types of things that they're looking for. You'll be able to research them, maybe even, and then if that doesn't work for you, there's obviously other internet-based places. There are tons and tons of rating lists out there. Take all of those rating lists with a grain of salt, because you don't know the criteria that they're using to rate school as the #1 program, right? If they rate somewhere as the #1 program in photography, what criteria are they using to rate #1? So take all the ratings with a grain of salt, right? But the ratings do give you a good place to start. So it gives you a sense of schools that you may not have heard of. So make sure you do your research, use those ratings carefully, talk to students and alum. I always think it's great to talk to the person who has the job you want, right? I want to find the person that has the job I want and ask him about his experience, about their experience, about what they would have done differently, what they did, what they didn't do, did the degree help or hurt, what degree they thought they needed, what trends are happening in the industry that might impact your educational choices. So it's great to talk to students, to talk to alum, and to talk to the people who have the job that you think that you want, right? So make sure you do those sort of things. Conferences and fairs are also great places to network and to get additional information, right? So make sure you take advantage of all of those resources. So sort of overall thing with, as you're gathering this information, start with your online research and then formulate offline questions, right? Formulate questions that you cannot answer online. There's nothing worse than being at a fair and somebody approaches you and asks you a question that they could have Googled and found the answer to in 2 minutes, right? So don't be that dude, right? Don't be the guy who comes up to USC and asks the director of admission at USC, do they have a program in psychology, right? That's not a question you're going to waste his time with. You want to make sure that you have thoughtful questions to help flesh out the information you can't find answers to, or you find contradictory answers to online. All right, so you're going to start with your research and know exactly what you're going to need, and then start, creating a ranking of the programs. What is my top choice? What's my next 3 choices? Kind of as you did when you were applying to undergrad, right? You had your programs, you thought about them. For grad school, it's much more important to focus on the program than the institution, right? Because Harvard may have a great program in business, but maybe Babson's entrepreneurship program is much, much more valuable than Harvard's. So you have to think about the program within the institution more so than the institution, right? Creative writing, right? The University of Michigan in the Upper Peninsula has a great program in creative writing, except no one knows where the Upper Peninsula is, right? No one knows, that's really Canada, not really the US. It's like Michigan, Canada. So that really small school has a fairly well-known creative writing program, but you'd never know that if you're simply researching institutions and looking at institutional rankings as opposed to programmatic rankings. So do your research on programs, right, so that you can rank the programs you're interested in, and then create timelines for yourself around, what am I going to do? When do I do my research? When am I taking the test? What are the application elements that I need to put together to ensure that my application is the best possible application I can get by the time I need to send it in? So, if you're looking at, here we have, what am I going to do in the winter and the spring, right? That's when your research starts. Not only research on programs, but research on prep courses, right? Do I need to take the GRE, right? Do I need to prep for the GRE? Not everybody needs to prep for the GRE. If you walk into the GRE and the first time you take a practice test, you score a 168, don't sign up for a prep course, right? Top score is a 170. There is no reason to sign up for a prep course. You get a 168 your first practice test, right? So you need to make sure you do your research so that you can fully prepare yourself for this entire thing, right? Do I need to prep? Don't automatically assume. Now, most people are not going to walk into the test and get a 168 their first time out, right? So you have to think about, what do I need to do? How do I get my best possible score? What sort of time do I have available to me? Because the time factor of this can be fairly significant, right? So researching schools, researching the test itself, right? Researching your preparation for the exam. When are you going to take the exam? It sometimes gets difficult to find appointments towards the end of the school year when every student is thinking about it. Like basically June through November is the busy time of year. So let me say that better. May and June, September, October, November tends to be the busy times of year for GRE test taking, right? So it may get difficult to find an appointment, especially if you're in a more remotely located area. I'm in New York City right now, and I know of 3 or 4 centers within a 20-minute train ride for me. But I also know when my brother took the GRE, he was in Charlottesville, Virginia, and he had to drive to Washington, D.C. to get an appointment for the test. So he had to take a 2-hour drive to take the test because there were no appointments near him. So make sure you're paying attention to what that schedule looks like and getting your test locked in so that it's not, so that you don't run into, I have to take a 2-hour drive to take this test and my test begins at 8 a.m. That would kind of suck. So you think about the spring and the winter, what you're going to do, and then summer, right? It's a great time to get a lot of stuff done, especially if you're not working, right? So that's where you start to think about, when am I requesting my transcripts, letters of recommendation, beginning my test prep, all of those sort of good things, right? Making sure I have a good list of which schools I'm going to apply to, right? And so throw some things in the fall. So your big takeaway here should be, what does my schedule look like from today until my application is due? Many applications are due in the fall, right? And again, it'll depend on programs. Some programs will have rolling admissions, just like we did for undergrad. So a lot of the process of applying to graduate school is the same as the process of applying to undergrad. The differences are because grad schools are it's not really grad schools, it's graduate programs, right? Because within the School of Business, you have the Masters of Business Administration, but you also have the Masters of Accountancy. For Masters of Accountancy, which might be in the School of Business, that's usually a program where people join straight out of undergrad. So the timeline for that is very different for the MBA program, where students who enter that program usually have taken 3, 4, 5 years off to work before they apply for an MBA. So the schedules there would be very, very different. So you have to think about, with regard to the program I'm interested in, what does my schedule look like, right? So that's what you're going to start thinking through. What are the elements that I need to make sure I get a hold of? Make sure you do it early for all the pieces that rely on somebody else, like requesting your transcripts, right? That might take a little bit longer if you have to wait on the school to send it, things of that nature, so you don't want to wait in the last minute for that. Visiting campuses, right? You want to make sure you visit the program and that's a place you want to live. My sister went to the University of Minnesota and she did a Master's of Kinesiology at the University of Minnesota. She finished in I think half the time because there's nothing to do in Minnesota when there's 3 feet of snow. So she took 21 credits a semester or something insane to get done. And is that the environment that you actually want to go to? I believe she visited in August. Had she visited in February, she might not have gone to the University of Minnesota. So you got to make sure you do your visits. You got to make sure you understand these things, right? And try to figure out what's going to be the best program for you with all things taken into consideration. So here's some things we want to do in the winter, right? A lot of it is paralleling what we've done for undergrad, right? Getting those recommendations. Usually with recommendations these days, they are online. So you send a link to your recommender and they click it and they're opened up to a form and the form is attached to your name and your application immediately and they just fill it all out online. So it's a really nice, simple system, but you got to make sure that the recommender actually does it. So thinking about what can you put together to make it easier for your recommender to write the letter of recommendation. You should send them, a brief synopsis. Don't write it for them, but hey, remember this project I did in your class? Let me point out these 3 things. My essays focus on my, my love for international law, and therefore that's why I'm applying to this school, so that the recommender can include these bits in their letter and you tell a cohesive story in your application. So you want to think about, being able to support the recommender and making his job, her job, as easy as possible for them to fill it out. All right, and then start looking for aid. This slide here we have on the bottom in January. I'm going to say that that's not a January thing. Let's cross that out. Let's say not January. Start today. If you are thinking about grad school, well, FAFSA is definitely, that's actually going to start opening October 1, right? So they have actually moved that up. But focusing on aid, start researching that now, because aid for grad school is not particularly easy to come by, right? But there are scholarships out there. There are fellowships out there. The earlier you find them, the better. So I would start researching that immediately, just so I know which fellowships I'm going to apply to, which fellowships are available to me, and where I might find additional funding so I don't have to take a ton of loans for school, right? So start that research now, and then, obviously you're going to fill out the financial aid form once it opens the fall before you start matriculation, okay? All right, so let's keep rolling here. So a touch on the GRE, or slightly more than a touch, right? So what's the GRE? Who takes it, right? All of the important questions, right? Thinking about things we know about the test. So the GRE stands for Graduate Record Exam, right? It is the test required by most, but not all, graduate programs. So you should definitely do some research into your programs as you start to narrow it down as to whether they require the GRE. Some programs, like MBA programs, are now requiring, like they traditionally, until about 7 years ago, MBA programs were exclusively GMAT. Then a few schools started allowing the GRE. Now, almost like slightly more than half of MBA programs accept either the GMAT or the GRE, right? So these things change over time. Law schools have recently started accepting the GRE. So if you're thinking about dual degree programs, like there's 3 law schools right now who accept the GRE. So it's not a big trend, but it's a growing trend. 2 years ago, no law schools were accepting the GRE. Right now, Arizona, Harvard, and I forget the third one that just announced it. Maybe it was Northwestern, just announced that they'll accept the GRE for law school applicants. So if I'm thinking about, a joint JD public policy degree, I might just take the GRE and have to do 1 test instead of 2. So who takes the GRE is a changing, answer. It's students applying to graduate programs. Which graduate programs? I'm not 100% sure. That will depend on the program, right? But if you're thinking about a graduate program, find out the test they're requiring. Almost all the programs require some test or another. And if it's not law, business, or medicine, it will typically be the GRE they require. Some things we want to think about with the test itself, right? And hopefully you've thought through a couple of these questions, right? What do we know about the GRE? Is it a measure of your intelligence, true or false? And hopefully you've thought about your answer there. Answer is false. The GRE doesn't measure intelligence. The GRE measures, what would I say it measures? It measures your knowledge of a certain small subset of skills. It measures verbal, it measures quantitative skills, basic math, verbal reasoning, things of that nature, but that's not necessarily intelligence, right? So you have to think about kind of what that means for you and what that might, and so not let the GRE freak you out as being this great measure of your ability to do well in grad school, right? If you've gotten through undergrad, you can probably get through a grad school program as well. Can it be used to award aid? It can be, right? So the operative term there is can. Some schools will tie, some programs will tie aid to GRE scores. So if you have a high GRE score, right, look to see if there's any aid tied to it, okay? Does it reflect your undergraduate GPA? Nope. There is some correlation, but it's not particularly high, and it doesn't particularly well predict your GRE, your graduate school GPA. The last time I looked, for those of you who know statistics, the correlation between GRE scores and graduate school GPA was somewhere around 0.53, all right? And correlation is measured on a -1 to a +1 scale, right? So 0.53 is not particularly high. Undergraduate GPA to graduate school GPA generally has a correlation of closer to 6, high 6s, low 7, right? So 0.65, 0.68, something like that. So it's not a great predictor, but it does help graduate schools predict that performance, right? If you took undergrad GPA alone, maybe they have a 0.65 correlation. You add in you add in GRE scores, and that predictive correlation goes up to like 0.68, 0.7. So that's why graduate schools like it. It helps them predict who is going to succeed. It's not perfect by any stretch, but schools like it because it helps. Right? The big thing here, I think, the most important thing about all of this is that you can increase your score. Right? No GRE score is fixed. If they can test something, you can learn it. Right? And that's the very nature of the test prep industry. Right? Because we know what they're going to test, we can teach people the stuff they're going to test and help them do better. Right? If you did not know the word defenestrate, right? And the likelihood of defenestrate showing up on the GRE is fairly high, then as soon as I tell you defenestrate means to throw out of a window, now the potential of your score has gone up. So the more words you learn, the higher your GRE score, right? So that's one thing that you should start doing right away. If you are thinking about taking the GRE, you should get yourself a GRE vocab list. Get a specific GRE vocab list from a test prep company. Find Princeton Review's GRE vocab list or something like that and put it in your Quizlet or whatever it is you do to study vocab, and just start studying it now. Because the GRE is going to be chock full of vocabulary, some of which you haven't seen before. Words like Stygian and pulchritudinous, things like that. If you don't know those words, it may be a challenge to do well in the test. So start studying vocabulary as soon as you can, because no matter what I do as a test prep teacher, the studying vocabulary is going to be on you, right? Ultimately, I can tell you what words to study. I can't study them for you, right? So you absolutely should prepare for the test, right? And it sort of tests what you learned in college. Not really. Most of the math on the GRE is 7th through 11th grade math. There's almost no college level math in there. No math that you actually were introduced to for the first time in college. There's no college level statistics. There's no calculus, right? It's all fairly basic 7th to 11th grade math presented in a way that some college students either are, they're far removed from and they can't remember it. Like, what if I asked you what's a prime number? How many of you remember the definition of a prime number, right? That's tough to remember. But with a little bit of study, you can refresh your mind on that and be ready for when the test asks you that. And then you have to get ready for the way they give it to you in kind of weird ways. Because the test is not going to ask you what's a prime number. They're going to ask you, what is the sum of the smallest prime number and the least integer greater than -6, right? So I'm just going to chock full a whole lot of vocab and definition and mathematical terminology to see if you can navigate all of that. Right? So you have to make sure you're preparing yourself for everything that's going to be on the test. Here's what the test looks like. It's 3 hours and 45 minutes, so it's a long test. It's on computer. It's a multi-stage adaptive test, which we'll touch on in just a second, right? And we already talked about graduate programs and doctoral programs, which I'm including in graduate programs, which often require that, right? And to register for it, you just go on GRE.org. You can also look and poke around to see schedule availability on GRE.org. So as you start to think about your date, you should, especially if you're in a place that doesn't have a lot of GRE centers, you should just monitor that and say, hey, how many appointments are available? Did they all start to go? Do I need to register relatively soon? If you're fairly flexible, it's not hard to get an appointment. Like me here in New York City, if I wanted to take the GRE, I could probably take it in the next 2 days because there are 4 centers to choose from, and I can also take the test at noon on a Wednesday. Right? If you can't just walk in and take the test at noon on a Wednesday, then you're going to need to plan further in advance because weekend appointments go pretty quickly and after work appointments go next, right? Things like that. So it gets harder and harder to schedule at a time that's convenient for you, right? So the GRE I mentioned is an adaptive test, right? Now it used to be a question adaptive test, but a few years ago they changed it to adaptive by section. Here's what that means. You walk into the GRE center, right? They check you in. They make you sign the form. They run you through all their security, make you put all your belongings in the lockup. You cannot have a calculator with you. You cannot bring your own pencil. They're going to give you scrap paper and pencils. They're actually going to wand you. You know the metal detector wand that they use in the club? Last time I took the GRE, they wanded me. The guy wanded under my foot as if I were going to sneak a weapon into the GRE. I don't know what they thought I was going to do, but they have high-level security in this test, which if you're disturbed by that, you want to make sure you know these things before you walk in the room so that you're not thrown off your game by any of the weird things that go on during the check-in process. But it's a very high-level security check-in process. So you're going to go through all of that, and the computer, when you walk into the test, it doesn't know anything about you. So it assumes that everyone is about average. So it gives the first quant section, let's say, because you'll have 2 quant sections and 2 verbal sections. So let's say it starts you off on quant, right? You get your first quant section. It's of medium difficulty, right? So that they can sort of figure out where you are. If you do well on that section, you'll get a harder second quant section, right? Because it says, hey, this person did pretty well in these medium questions. Let's give them a harder question, and that narrows the score range, right? The score range for quant and verbal, right? For quant, it's 130 to 170, as it is for verbal. So now that I did well on my medium section, that score range is now narrowed, right? Instead of 130 to 170, let's say I now have a range of 150 to 168 because it says, hey, he did pretty well. So it's narrowed down my score, and it's given me a second section with questions that reflect that higher level of difficulty. Okay, well, if I didn't do so well, if I did okay, then it's going to give me a medium difficulty section. And again, my reflected possible score range will reflect that. So if I started at a 130 to 170 on section 1, now my range narrows a bit, and maybe I'm at a 155 to 145 range, and I'm sort of making up these numbers. I don't know precisely what the range reduction would be, but they've narrowed that range based on my performance on the second section, and they've given me questions that reflect that sort of prediction of what, based on what happened in the first section. And if I do poorly, same thing happens, right? My last section is going to reflect my ability level, and they're going to be giving me questions that they think reflects that ability level. So as you're taking the GRE, it is adaptive, right? Based on how your first section is, your second section will give you questions that reflect that performance, right? Which means it becomes increasingly important to do well in that first section. You want to establish that super hard second section, right? You want that second section to be terribly difficult because your score will reflect that no matter how you perform on that second section, right? If that score range for the second section is, let's say 170 to 155, I'm going to do better than if somebody has a score range for that second section, which is 130 to 155, regardless of performance. So you want to make sure that you do really well on that first section, right? Now, obviously, you can't kind of distribute time differently, but you want to keep that in mind, right? I'm gonna make sure that of the 2 sections, even though the time is distributed evenly, that first section carries more weight in my score than the second section does. So understanding the scoring of the test helps you develop strategies to take the test more effectively. And that's the key thing here, right? As you're thinking through this whole process, everything you learn, you want to turn into something you can use to make you more effective, more productive, right? More likely to get admitted to the school that you're interested in, all right? So here's a particular breakdown of what it looks like, the scoring, right? So we have 4 sections to the test. Actually, it's 2. Well, so there's the analytical writing section, of which there is only 1, right? You'll have 2 essays to write, 30 minutes each, so it's a total of an hour, and it's scored separately from 0 to 6, so that doesn't influence any of the other scoring. Then you have a quant section, and then you'll have a verbal section, then you'll have another quant section and another verbal section. So there are 2 quant sections and 2 verbal sections, and they generally alternate them. Although ETS hasn't promised us that they will always alternate them, they've never committed to that being the structure. I've never heard of it being anything different. And then they periodically give an experimental section, which won't count towards your score, okay? So that's what your test will look like. That's what the scoring looks like. So you start to think about, one, preparing for the test to ensure that your application, that it doesn't hinder your application, right? That it will enhance your chance of acceptance, right? You have a terrible GRE score. To me, that's like wearing, that's going to a job interview at a Wall Street bank, and wearing jeans and sneakers. That might not stop you from getting in, but it certainly ain't helping, right? You put on a suit, you put on a really nice suit, right? It may not get you the job, but it will certainly help convince them that you are a fit for the job. So you have to think about kind of your GRE score as something that helps you make a strong first impression and helps you be competitive with other students, right? So we've been talking a lot about GRE, and when I say GRE, I mean the GRE General Test. I think it's formally called the new revised General GRE exam, maybe the formal name of it. That's only important in terms of comparing it to the GRE subject exams, right? Just like you had SAT subject tests, there are actually GRE subject tests. In specific disciplines like psychology, I know there's one. There's, I believe, a math and a few sciences. They're required by certain programs, right? So subject tests are not something you should take unless a specific program has asked you for it, right? Most graduate programs ask for the GRE. A small subset of graduate programs will require the GRE subject test. So you have to know which subject tests are required by your program and then prepare for them. I personally don't teach any of the subject tests. They're actually like real knowledge on those tests. I refuse to teach any standardized tests with real knowledge on it. The GRE has some basic high school math, some basic vocabulary reading comprehension. That's cool, right? The GRE subject test in psychology will ask about real content that you would have learned in college if you studied psychology. So that requires a different level of knowledge, a different knowledge base than the general test does. So you want to make sure before you even look at those exams whether they would be required, and then find out specifically the content they're going to test, because clearly there's going to be a wide array of material that could be on a psychology exam. So make sure you consider and are aware of the existence of subject tests and do your research to find out whether the program you're interested in is going to require those subject tests, and if they do require it, which ones do they require it? And do they require it in addition to the general GRE, or do they require it in place of the general GRE? I know programs that have done both. So you want to make sure that you look at that and carefully evaluate that as you're thinking about the programs you need to apply to. Right. Okay, let me just take a quick check to see if there are any questions that I want to get to right now. If I don't get to your question right now, then we'll certainly get to it later or have someone email a follow-up. Okay, so resources that we are thinking about, right? So first step would be, I would think that the homework, actually not suggestion, your homework leaving here tonight, if you showed up here tonight, you were thinking about grad school, then leaving here tonight, somewhere in the next 2 weeks, you need to take a free GRE practice test if you have yet to take one. You can easily do that by going to princetonreview.com and just taking the practice test that's there. Everyone who's thinking about graduate school should know as soon as possible, is my GRE score a 160 or a 130? Right? If your GRE score is a 130, that means you better have a 1-year plan in place to improve your score. If my GRE is a 160, then I might have a 6-week plan in place because I want a 165, a 168, right? So you have to know where you're starting right now so that you can put an appropriate plan in place to move on, to prepare for the test, right? So one of the things that you're thinking about also is your research, right? So you're looking at grad school search engines, right? There's a search on princetonreview.com. You can find a grad school search, and you want to find programs that are a good fit for you. Now, what do I mean by that, right? What I mean by that is just because it's psychology doesn't mean it's the psychology you want to study, right? Some places are clinical, some places are touchy-feely, right? So you have to know the type of program that you're interested in, right? So don't just look at the rankings, because the rankings tend to rank quantitative things, right? What sort of endowment does the school have? What's the average salary of the people coming out of the program? Those are the types of things that rankings can quantify. They can't quantify, is it in a cold climate, right? I would never go to University of Minnesota. When I went to pick up my sister from University of Minnesota, there was 3 feet of snow on the ground in May. There is nowhere in the world I want to live for even a month with 3 feet of snow on the ground in May. So Minnesota wouldn't be a good fit for me, not because of the program, but because of the environment of the school. So when you're looking at fit, you have to make sure you consider all of those things, right? Academics, the professors, what the focus is. Are classes taught by practitioners, right? If it's a psychology program, I want actually practicing psychologists to teach my classes preferably. Or are they going to have grad assistants who are in the PhD program teaching your program, right? Are they having classes of 100 students, or is it small workshops of 12 students? So those sort of things might influence my choices as to which program I'm interested in. So all of those factors, every factor that influences the experience at the program are going to be what should factor into fit, right? Most people stop their evaluations at GPA, GRE scores, and do they have the major I want, right? To make sure that you have a good experience and to make sure that you can talk to the university about why that program is right for them, you have to make sure that you've considered all the other factors. I want to go to, study public policy at the University of Virginia because I know that this renowned scholar teaches at the University of Virginia and his program is the one that I want to participate in, right? That shows a good fit to the school because they know you've done your research, they know you're aware of who's leading the department and the type of research and information and focus that the department has and how that would influence your learning experience. So that's the kind of thing that you want to pay attention to. So start to do your research, right? Make sure that you spend some time with that. Let's see. So that's going to take some time, right? It's going to require research. It's going to require some time. It's going to require conversations because a lot of this you won't be able to find online, which is why fairs and visits are great because you can get answers to those questions that are not website questions, right? So make sure you investigate all of those sort of things, right? So kind of pulling all of this together for us, right? Princeton Review has a ton of different services and resources available to you. You can do basic school research on Princeton Review, that's the website, princetonreview.com, obviously. And you can sign up for GRE prep courses. There's a variety of courses. There's homework help. One of the new services that Princeton Review's launched is homework help, which is basically live tutoring available 24/7 on a question-by-question basis. So you sign up for an hourly package and you have stuck on one question, you hit the button, you log on, some expert in statistics is there to help you with that. So check out all of those things as you go through to try to see what resources are available to you and where we can help you in this process. Yes, we're going to have the recording available to all of you. Someone just asked whether the recording will be available. It will absolutely be available. Now's a good time to put in questions if you have questions. I think I've answered many of them as we've gone. So someone says, if I haven't developed some of the skills while in undergrad that may be useful in grad school, will I be able to do so in grad school without failing? Specifically, you pointed to public speaking. So what you want to separate, I think that question for me brings up 2 separate issues. There's one issue of admission, which is primarily what we're talking about tonight, right? And what you should be thinking about in terms of what are the factors that play into getting admitted to the school, okay? GPA, GRE scores, letters of recommendations, essays, things of that nature factor into getting admitted to the school. And then there's the secondary issues of factors in being successful. And those 2 things overlap, but they aren't the same. Public speaking, which you mentioned, made me think about that. Public speaking has nothing to do with getting admitted unless the school requires an interview, and in that case, it might influence your admissions decision. But for the most part, your ability to public speak won't influence admissions. I don't know of a program where public speaking, well, I guess presentations may influence some universities. So that's another thing about FIT. Is the program I'm applying to one that grades primarily on academic written work and test, or is it one that is built around group projects and working together and things of that nature? So you have to investigate that, because if you are not good at public speaking and the university program that you're applying to is graded on group projects and presentations, that might be a non-starter for you. That might not be the kind of program you're interested in. So you have to find that out based on the program you're interested in, right? And that's going to vary hugely across programs. Some programs, you know, are your traditional academic program where you're tested by papers and tests and things of that nature, and there's no public speaking component to it. Other programs are going to go the other way, where it's much more experiential and you know, communal work and presentation. So do some research around that and find out. You know, there are thousands of different academic programs in the country. There are about 3,800 colleges in the country, so it would be hard to say what would be the case at every individual graduate program. Okay, so you start to think about, you know, thinking about admissions criteria, thinking about success criteria. If you are an older student and you have a family, that might influence my choice. You know, there are some schools that are very family friendly, and there are other schools that aren't, right? I know that UVA has a very good support system in place for students with families. They actually, I believe, have a dorm specifically for students with families in the MBA program and in the public policy school, right? Last I heard. So that might be a great place if I have family. Whereas other schools might not have any accommodations for children at all, right? So you have to start thinking about those sort of things when you're investigating programs. Same sort of thing applies to test prep, right? I want to start thinking about what's going to influence my test prep decisions beyond money, right? So what kind of prep do I want to do? What sort of support do I need? Can I do it online or off? You know, there's the GRE self-paced product, which Princeton Review has, which basically means you do it online and you do it at your own speed and at your own pace. And I'm surprised by this slide. I did not know, but it's $199. In the past, it had been, I want to say, somewhere around $500. So that it's great price, right? So for a comprehensive program that covers everything you need to know for this test, so this is a great place to start. So you start to think about, how am I going to prepare? Do I need an in-person class, or am I good studying on my own, right? So you want to think about what those prep options are. I would say a book is the most sort of isolated by yourself program. A online self-study program will become more interactive and more engaging than a book. So that's the next step up. And then you start to get into a live classroom experience, which is the next step up, since there's a person in front of you who can ask. You also can have an online live experience, similar to what we're doing now, except our online classes, the live online classes, allow you to ask questions verbally and directly to the instructor and have a live chat. So it's a little bit more interactive than we have here with simply the question window. And then there's also tutoring experiences where it's one-on-one, potentially in your home or online, which gives you, again, much, much more interaction. So you have to think about how you want to prep, what sort of prep you need, and how that's going to influence, you know, and how you're going to use that to get you where you need to go, right? Let's see if we have any other questions here. Please guide something about research for CS students to, I don't know much about CS programs, so I'm gonna pause on the CS question. So leave that alone. Research papers generally are not part of an admission package, right? The admissions materials that most programs that I know of, and I'm gonna caveat everything with that I know of, because again, different programs are popping up every year. There's new programs every year, and what they require of applicants may change. No program I've heard of has required a research paper as part of the admissions criteria. Admissions criteria is generally grades, just the GPA and the transcript from the college, test scores, an essay as part of the application, and then letters of recommendation, right? And maybe a resume to speak to your work experience. So those are the components that are generally required with an application. Right? They might also add in an interview in that. Beyond that, I haven't heard of much else, okay? although again, at some programs that might vary, okay? Usually with recommendations, they ask for 2 or 3, right? So you're not looking at, 10, 12 recommendations, you're looking at 2 or 3, okay? So let me just look at one more question, and then we'll see how we're doing on time. Okay, so we have one question. How do you know to go for self-paced or tutor classes? So the distinction between self-paced and tutoring, like the difference between self-paced and tutoring is pretty profound, right? Self-paced is someone who is saying they are very self-sufficient, they can motivate themselves, they can practice on their own, they don't need a lot of guidance and support, right? Tutoring, I would think, goes the other route. Somebody who needs very, very specific instructions, a lot more guidance, support, and structure to what they're doing than somebody who chooses self-paced. So I think those are very, very different people, and you have to know kind of what you're going to be more successful with. I personally could never do self-paced because I'm the type of person who, if there isn't a reason for me to go, like if somebody isn't kind of, browbeating me into doing it, I'm probably not going to do it. So I wouldn't be a great person for self-paced. But if I have a class I'm signed up for and I know I have to show up and look the teacher in the face, I'm much more likely to do my work. I'm not going to procrastinate. I'm going to be there. So I'm the type of person who would be more successful with a tutor or a classroom class. So another question is, any tips on the statement of purpose? So the statement of purpose is so someone wants to know any tips on the statement of purpose which could be a distinguishing factor. For all of these things, for every element of your application, there is no one element which will carry more weight than any other element, right? Let me say that better. The quantifiable elements tend to be the ones that carry the most weight. GPA and test scores tend to carry the most weight. Once you get past those hurdles, you don't know really the weight at an individual institution that the other factors will carry. So you want to make sure that you present yourself as honestly and as completely as possible. So with the statement of purpose, I would want to make sure that I speak to why I want to attend this institution for this program, which means I have to have insight into this institution and what makes it better for me than all of the other competing institutions. And if you can clearly convey that to them, then it's more likely that they will offer you a seat, right? And I think that's the best that I could say kind of about that statement of purpose. That's kind of your job in the application, is to clearly convey why that institution is a good fit for you and why you are a good fit for that institution. This is a lot like dating, right? A lot of it makes sense, right? A lot, like the pretty people will be together, right? But sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Sometimes, the Angelina Jolie dates Billy Bob Thornton, and it just like there's no real reason those two people should have ever been together, but there's something in there crazy that attracts one another. And graduate programs are somewhat like that. It's a relationship of convincing them that the thing you have is appropriate to their institution and more appropriate than all of the other applicants for that seat. Okay, so do your research, right? It's going to be a lot of research. It's going to be a lot of understanding the various components of it, and make sure that you have a good picture of what the school offers and how you fit into that picture. All right, let's take a quick poll so that we can try to understand a little bit more about where you guys are and what you're looking forward to. So if you can just throw up some answers there for me, that would be a lovely thing. You have the polling on your screen, and we'll leave it up for just a minute before we move on to other fun things. If we haven't gotten to your question today, remember that we'll always be able to follow up. We'll send out the recording within the next 48 hours or so to everybody, so you can always review what we've had here. We'll also put up in just a second an email address so that you can contact us if you have questions that you'd like to dig a little bit deeper on. On our website, there's a lot of articles and sample questions on the GRE. Like I said before, I think the best thing that everyone can do is to take a practice GRE as soon as you can. Whether you prepare for it or not, it doesn't matter, right? You take a practice GRE on Princeton Reviews website, you have, the scores stay between you and the website. So it's a great way to find out approximately where you are without any of the stakes involved, right? And I think you should take as many practice tests as you can before you go into the real thing. I'm not going to pay $200 for a test if I don't know my score. So I'm only going to take the GRE after I'm fairly confident about the score that I'm going to get. And the only way for me to be confident about the score I'm going to get is having taken several practice tests before I walk into the real exam. All right, so a couple of other things. Lastly, here's how you can get in touch with us. You will get the recording relatively soon. We'll take a couple more questions. Valerie, are there any more questions that we need to tackle?
It looks like you actually did a great job of covering that, but I do see that Mohammed has a question about links to past webinars. So just so you guys know, you can access all future and past webinar recordings if you go to princetonreview.com/webinars. Everything is on that page, and it is an awesome resource for all of you who are thinking about grad school or about just picking up some GRE strategies. Go ahead and visit that. If you also want to take a couple of minutes to scroll through the chat, I have actually inserted a couple of links for you guys. So if you go there, you'll see a link that'll direct you straight to our free practice test. Also, if you're thinking about GRE prep, another great way to decide what you need and to kind of get a sense of what the Princeton Review experience is like is head on over to our sample classes. These are completely free, and this will give you a really good exposure to what we do in our live online sample classes. So check out those links, and it looks like that's it for questions. So thank all of you guys for joining us tonight and just hearing Akil talk shop about admissions. And Akil, do you have any final words of wisdom for our attendees?
No, I think we've hit it all. The two big takeaways should be do your research and start preparing for the GRE.
All right. So thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And like Akil mentioned, we will be emailing out a recording of tonight's event. So thank you so much and have a great night. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.